to look at that baseline report, I'd encourage you to do so. Once the baseline report is established and we roll that out to the community, I think some members of the commission refer to that as the Bible, what we do and how we do it and how much it costs in these two local governments. The study process really pivots to the options phase, and Chad mentioned this as well. What we did in the options phase, and that was a separate report, there are also excerpts of that in the packet that's outside the room, is we looked at each functional area, each service that the township and borough provide, either services that they both provide or one provides and the other doesn't. And we looked at a range of restructuring options. So if we were to consolidate these two municipalities and we had to merge the two courts, or we had to merge the two police departments or the two departments of public works, what is the range of options? And if you look at what we did for each of those service areas, we went from a kind of a baseline, we simply amalgamate the two departments, we level up salaries, we don't look at any operational restructuring in those departments, and here's the fiscal impact of that approach. We go through a series of options up to a more comprehensive restructuring, identifying potential efficiencies, right? Well, now I don't need two department heads. Or maybe by consolidating certain subunits of particular departments, there might be operational or financial efficiencies that we can gain. So we present a range of options in the options report. Really an option for each decision point, and not just around the services that are delivered, but around debt. We had an analysis of debt in there, choosing a form of government, right? There were a series of options for form of government, and we outlined the relative pros and cons for each of those forms. I think this is an important point, too, about the options report. The options report was really released coincident with the Commission's recommendations. When we rolled the options report out to the community, we didn't just report to the community the specific options that the Commission endorsed, option 3 for courts, option 2 for the clerk's office, option 4 for financial administration. We reported the entire range of options. Again, trying to be transparent with the community so that residents and other stakeholders in the community could say, okay, well, here are the range of options that the Commission and its consultant looked at. And they endorsed option 3, they recommended option 3. Now I can do, as an end user, I can do my own comparison and contrasting of why that option over the other, and allow them to inform and target their questions back to the Commission. Because if the broader community is not asking those questions, then there's something critical that's missing in the process. So I think by reporting the range of options for every single decision point in the process, back to the community. Again, not just the recommended options, that provided for a more informed and engaged community. And then, of course, as Chad points out, the engagement of the community during this process, certainly spearheaded by the Commission's Community Outreach Subcommittee, was beyond any that I've seen in any of the dozens of similar studies that I've worked on at CGR. We've probably done 75 or 80 of these in the last 10 years, and the public outreach component in Princeton was certainly the most robust that we've seen. That certainly was a significant time commitment on the part of the Commission, on the part of the individual members, but played a critical role in, again, informing the broader community and empowering the broader community to in turn inform the study process. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Chad, to talk in a little more detail.
See if the mics work now.
Okay.
I heard that there's a possibility that the mics are working.
They're working.
Ah, good. All right. So, thanks, Joe, for talking us through the study process. One of the other things that we end up talking about during my presentation was the concerns, the emotional concerns, and also just the real concerns that either community may have when it comes to consolidating. And we actually have Heather Howard here, who is a resident of the former Princeton Borough. Heather, I don't know if you wanted to touch on maybe some of the obstacles or concerns that were raised and how we overcame those.
So welcome. You are sitting now in what was formerly known as the borough, but we are in the donut hole. And I thought I would just, Chad asked me to talk briefly about what were some of the issues, some of the concerns in the borough. And I think they fall into three buckets. The first was this perceived cultural difference between the borough and the township, both Princeton, of course. And when you analyze the difference between the two communities, they're pretty few in terms of average salary, voting patterns, actually very similar communities. And each of our elementary schools takes kids from both the borough and the township, those former areas. But there still was this perception of a cultural difference and this boroughness, because this donut hole, the former donut hole, is more densely populated and more walkable. So there was this sense that there would be a takeover by the township, imposing the values of the township, which is less dense, less walkable. That was this perception of the difference between the two, but it's really intangible. The second area, I think, where there was concern on the part of former borough residents was the closeness of government. The representation per resident was greater in the borough, so folks felt like they knew their representatives. We elected our mayor in the borough form of government. And so again, a concern, would there be a township takeover and our government would look different? We wouldn't know our representatives. We'd be represented only by people who lived in the former township. The third area of concern was service levels. We had expected and benefited from strong service levels in the borough. We had in trash pickup, leaf pickup, in police in police services, and so a concern: would there be a diminution in services if we consolidated? So thinking about those being perhaps the three areas of concern, how did we address those? Well, let's go back to our first principles, which Chad's talked about. It was so important to communicate, and to communicate this value of uniting Princeton and focusing on the benefits of consolidation. So we focused on how do we have a more efficient and responsive government? How do we strengthen, not diminish services? And then how do we show that it's all been worth it and there are fiscal savings? And I know our mayor is going to talk about those, but just in terms of services, where it was so important to say you're not going to see a diminution. Folks were used to knowing if I put out a sofa on the street corner, somebody's going to pick it up. Am I still going to have that level of service? So it was really important to listen to folks and to say we're not going to diminish services. And not only are we not going to diminish, we're going to strengthen them. So I know you have a panel later this morning on police services. We've been able to, and so I think they'll go into greater detail, we've been able to reinstate community policing because of the efficiencies we've achieved through consolidation. So we were able to assure people you're going to see the same level of policing and actually get better policing services. So that small community you've been used to, you're still going to have that level of services. And if you want, we can get into it with Q&A, but you're going to still get that sofa picked up, you're still going to have your leaves picked up. It was really important for folks to feel like they weren't going to lose that touch with their government. And I think we can report that there wasn't a township takeover. There are 3 people who previously served in the Borough Council who now serve on the new council, and one of the recommendations from the Consolidation Commission was that we adopt the borough form of government. So we directly elect Liz, our mayor, was directly elected. So I think there was a tremendous sensitivity to what folks liked about their previous government, and how do we keep what folks liked and then build upon it.
Well, thanks, Heather. I mean, Heather definitely touched on, some of the key issues that were certainly raised. And as you mentioned, I mean, it was interesting that after the election was held for the new governing body, actually there's 4 members of the new governing body that reside in the former borough, and 3 are from the township. So that didn't turn out to be the case where there was, that township takeover. But one of the things that I didn't really dive that deep into, but we have Bob Bruschi, the administrator that served under the former Princeton Borough and now under the fully combined municipalities, the issue of staff. This process, whether you're looking at a shared service or consolidation, can cause a certain amount of animosity and tension with staff. And it's important that, throughout the process of studying that you're sensitive to it, but also during a transition once, for example, in the Princetons, once we voted to approve consolidation, we formed the transition task force. And that task force was charged with basically the implementation of consolidation to the single municipality. And that caused concern among the staff in terms of obviously job security, but also benefits harmonization and things of that nature. And we wanted to make sure that when we conducted that process that we were as sensitive to it as possible. And again, that means, a high degree of communication, but it also puts a lot of importance on your administrative staff, and Bob and his team did a great job transitioning us to a consolidated municipality. And Bob, you want to talk a little bit about staff and how we address those issues?
Would love to. We're still addressing them. What Chad said is entirely correct. I think the biggest thing is to get the staff to buy into the entire process, because clearly they're going to be providing information that theoretically could be eliminating their own job. And having them involved from the outset, I think, was extremely important. The first function that they had in the whole consolidation study was to meet with Joe Stefko and his staff to go through what you do, what your department do, how much things cost, how many staff do you have. So they were involved from day one, and that made a huge difference, at least as far as feeling part of the process. That whatever the decision was, that it wasn't going to be willed upon them down the line. They were going to have some potential to impact the outcome. So I think that was very, very important. And also, from a staffing perspective, was to advise the staff that, this really is a time for them to shine. This is an opportunity to say all the things that you do, all the things you do well. But it's also a time that, you have to keep your staff kind of under lock and key. They need to be protected in going through this thing, to feel as if this process is not personally directed at either one of them. When you read in the newspaper, we're going to only have one municipal engineer and two are part of the process, one of them obviously knows that they are not going to be the municipal engineer, and potentially both may not be. So from my perspective, the most important thing was to get them involved in the beginning, which we accomplished, and to keep them involved right through the bitter end. The process is a long process, and I don't think anyone going into this thing even envisioned remotely the time commitment that it was going to take from the staff, as well as the time commitment it took from the Consolidation Commission and ultimately the task force. Chad mentioned the meetings and the like, and staff was involved at every level of those meetings. Whether it was a subcommittee meeting, there were staff involved. Whether it was a full commission or a transition committee meeting, there was staff at every one of those meetings, and in most cases, multiple staff, so that every question that came up could either be answered immediately or an answer could be forthcoming on it. So I think the biggest impact or the biggest factor in this thing is to make sure that the staff is involved from day one, because clearly, to me, they're our most important resource. They are the community. They're the ones that are going to deliver this at the end. The last thing I would just say coming out of the gate is that I think it's also important to keep the staff away from the process. Don't take a position as to whether or not consolidation is good or bad. That's not our decision. Unless we were living in the community, and in that case, just keep it a secret. You're here to provide information, be a resource, and I think it was important to try to keep them focused on doing those things.
Yeah. No, thanks, Bob. I mean, that is something that is critically important, and the way that we dealt with the staff through the process was important, and also, as elected officials at that time, we actually held department head briefings where we would basically give the department heads updates as to where we were in the process, some of the issues that not only we were facing, but we heard feedback from them as to some of the things that they were concerned about, so that we could prioritize and address some of those issues to make sure that we weren't losing some of the staff just out of fear or out of concern, because as Bob had mentioned, the staff is your most critical resource. They're the ones that deliver those services, and that's really what you are as a municipal government. You're in the service industry, and it's important to keep those people in place. And we had, I think in both communities, we felt that we had very strong, talented staff members in virtually all of our departments, and it was important to bring them along, the entire step of the way, but also to engage them and address their concerns as best as we could at the various different stages of the process. Once we ended up consolidating and going through that transition phase, obviously, we looked at Financial savings. Financial savings are one, key reason why communities engage in this process. But there's also, other areas that we found in terms of streamlined governance and service delivery efficiency. And I wanted to introduce the mayor of the new community of Princeton, Liz Lempert. She was instrumental in the consolidation process. She also worked with the Unite Princeton issue-driven campaign and did a tremendous job getting out the vote on the referendum, and has been just a big supporter of this effort and has done a great job. And just wanted to turn it over to Liz to talk about some of the financial impacts and also some of the things that you see from what are the major differences in the new community versus if we had two separate communities.
Well, is this working? So one of the things we tried to do all along was to bring together the best of both worlds. And one of Chad's legacies from being on Township Committee was the creation of the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee, which is a group of citizen volunteers, financial professionals in the community who help us put together our budget every year and look at long-term strategic financial planning. So this was something that we put together again in the new community, and they've been instrumental in one of the biggest tasks we had was just to put together the 2012 budgets from last year, because the way the borough put together their budget was slightly different than the way the township put together their budget, and to start again with a baseline so we can compare where we are this year. The township and borough, I believe, were the two communities in the state of New Jersey that shared more services than any other. So we had 13 shared services last year, and the way those are accounted for in the budget, there's a bit of double counting going on, because one town would be the banker for the service, and then the other would pay their contribution. So for example, in the recreation department, the township was the banker, so they would have the full recreation department budget accounted for, and then the borough would have their portion of that in their budget. So when we combined the two budgets, the total was more than the actual spending going on, because there were these checks going back and forth for the services. And at the end, I think it showed some of the inefficiencies that were going on. When you have so many shared services, it was inefficient and a bit of a burden to both. But in comparing, there was a reduction of about of $2.5 million, which was just accounted for this double counting. But there are also major decreases, as Bob mentioned. We're saving about $1.2 million just in staff reductions, and an additional $600,000 because we were able to move to better health insurance, cheaper health insurance. And it's complicated because there's increases too that are in the budget this year. We're extending garbage, which used to only be for the borough. We're extending that townwide. And we had additional things, but overall the good news is that we're able to reduce the tax rate from 47 cents down to 45 cents. So it's a reduction of 2 cents, and that's down to 45 cents. So it's a reduction of 2 cents. Another challenge we have is managing expectations. So, there's been a lot of news that we're reducing the tax rate, but that's only the municipal piece of the tax rate. And of the property tax bill, the municipal portion is about a little over 20%, but there will be an increase this year in school taxes and in county taxes. So we're trying to get the message out that, this is, consolidation has been a really great thing for Princeton in being able to bring down our costs and increase our services. And But in the context of the larger tax bill, people are still going to see an increase, not due to consolidation. If it hadn't been for consolidation, the taxes would have been even higher. And just to pick up on what Heather Howard was talking about with service increases,